It's a joy to be here. This idea for a conversation emerged out of the thought that some of the values between peacemaking and entrepreneurship, transparency and the web have something in common. And also, further to Joshua's introduction, my mother said, don't tell him all the questions in advance. To start off with, recently someone described you as the David Beckham of diplomacy. Tell us about that.
I hear some people laughing. This happened in London when I got an honorary doctorate in UCL, University College London, and in the evening we had a dinner, and when the dinner was over, the president of the UCL, I said that you didn't realize how appropriate this description was, because I'm a football fan. I love football. And furthermore, David and I have a same problem, how to retire gracefully. So I can't obviously do as he might do, to go to the fashion world, so I have to try to make peace instead.
And purely from the domestic point of view, it seems that retirement is not in the cards. It's actually busier and busier. You founded, after the presidency, the Crisis Management Initiative, which from my point of view looks like a crisis management startup. And at least from a startup's point of view, in the early phases and in later phases, people are the critical thing. So how do you build the teams, and how do you choose the people to work on particular conflicts?
I'm in a very lucky position that when I look, for instance, I give you an example about two operations. The first one in my life was, with the UN context, was Namibia, where we started in 1st of April 1989 and stayed a year in Namibia. I had 11 years to pick the best people that I could lay my hands on in the UN. I was, at the time, Undersecretary for Administration and Management. And many of my colleagues, we were 8,000. If you count the whole international presence, we were 8,000 in Namibia for that year. Many of them have done an excellent career in the UN and international service since then. It was first-class team. When I ever go to New York, I still meet my colleagues, and we'll have a dinner together. The other is Kosovo. That was perhaps even more crucial, because we were less than 20 in Vienna in my office. It was of vital importance to pick the best people I could lay my hands on. I had some whom I knew beforehand, and we picked nationalities. I had excellent German, I had a very good Russian, I had a Ukrainian, Bulgarian, Ghanaian in my team, the British with a Chinese background, first-class person, and a countryman of mine, and Austrian. My deputy was from Austria. But I would like to emphasize that I think it's the first task that one has to do, that you have to try to pick the best people you can work with. As a former head of administration and management, that I know that UN Secretariat doesn't send normally the best people to you. They want to normally get rid of somebody and offer them to you. So if you don't know the system, you are in a much worse position than I have been. Second thing is that I have always had leave of absence from my government. It means that I have maintained my independence in these operations. And that, to me, is of vital importance. But, Marko, if you allow me, I would also like to say that you always need the main governments backing you in whatever you do. I have had the pleasure of, in Namibia, I had an unholy alliance with the Americans in lead, South Africans, Angolans, Russians, or they were Soviet Union still when we started, Cubans, and I called it an unholy alliance. In Kosovo, I had a contact group with the Americans, Brits, French, Germans, Italians, and Russians. And I would not take a single assignment in peacemaking if I would not get this sort of support that I have had with these teams. And may I also say that I have learned over the years that you need the Americans on board, because if you can't have the Americans, it's nearly impossible to achieve in your task. So this is not a solo performance. You need your good team, but then you need the support as well.
Great. We have a history of sending articles back and forth, and a few years ago you sent a short piece from the FT by the late Dame Anita Roddick of The Body Shop, founder of The Body Shop, and the title heading of the article was "Don't get an MBA, get angry." And you said, read this, it tells a lot about how I like to do peacemaking.
It so happened that we have a habit of sending books and articles to each other, which I must say that I value. Marko, perhaps surprisingly, has more time to read than I do, or then he does it much faster than I. But it so happened that that article reminded me similarities in peacemaking, because you have to regard every peace operation as a sui generis, a special case. None are similar. You, of course, learn from one which you can apply to some extent, but they have all special features. And perhaps why I'm not against MBAs as such, but I wanted to emphasize that it's important to be open-minded and not to be compartmentalized, and be innovative when you look for solutions. The process is, when you make, I still sit on a business boards as well in my country, and I see that we go through the same sort of processes: pre-feasibility study, feasibility study, due diligence when we come to that moment. Same processes when I have to say whether my organization gets involved somewhere or not.
I think further on the theme of how you come to a solution, one thing about the application of design in business is that rapid prototyping and very quickly sketching what a solution could be is critical in helping people think clearer about a problem. And could you talk about that? Like, how important is that in peacemaking early on in the process to see the change you need to make?
Even before you start collecting your team, you are in charge of the strategic planning when you lead this sort of mission. And you have to make it clear what is the end result, and make it fairly clear. In my case, all these three major operations that I have been involved in, everywhere it was known from the beginning what the final outcome was going to be. Namibia was going to be independent. Aceh was supposed to be a special autonomy within Indonesia, and Kosovo was going to be independent nation. So that you have to first clarify. And then you have to start looking whom do you need to support you in the process then.
In terms of transparency during the process, so the internet is the great democratizer of information, but always in every step of a peace process, transparency and everything leaking out during the process doesn't help getting to a satisfactory conclusion. So can you talk about that, transparency and peacemaking?
I use Aceh as an example because I proposed to the parties, Indonesian government delegation and Free Aceh movement representatives, main part of them came from Sweden. A couple of them were already Swedish citizens, so I could speak Swedish to them. And I proposed immediately that let's agree that nothing is agreed before everything is agreed. Because otherwise I could not have opened the difficult issues. It was important to get the rebels, the Free Aceh movement, to start coming with their think pieces. how preliminary they might have been, but they were not held ransom on those, but we could open the difficult issues. And to my surprise, both delegations honored that. It was very lousy for the media, because we were only able to talk about atmospherics in the talks, but that guaranteed that less than half a year we had a peace agreement in our hands. And that to me required that silence vis-à-vis the media, but it didn't require the silence vis-à-vis those who were living in Malaysia, who were living in Sweden or elsewhere in the world. They had to be briefed what was going on in Helsinki. I couldn't do it because we were sitting in the negotiations, but I could rely on some of the Swedish and Swiss organizations who helped me actually to keep the parties informed, so that they didn't become spoilers. Because very often when you have an agreement, if you have a big, for instance, World Bank scholars have studied years ago the US market, and when you look at the immigrant community there, if you have a big immigrant community in US, they calculated that there was a 38% chance that the peace agreement will fail. Because people who have left their home a long time ago, they tend to be holier than the Pope. They have forgotten what it is to face the atrocities on the field, and somehow you have to deal with the diaspora. That's perhaps something we have lately learned, that you have to keep the diaspora happy, knowledgeable what's going on, listen to them as well, bring them sometimes to the field as well, if that's possible.
So if transparency during the process maybe doesn't work, you're on the board of the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, which publishes index for African good governance based on nearly 100 different criteria, from human rights, respect of rule of law, human development, economic opportunities, and those kinds of things. People on the internet love rankings, trending topics on Twitter, lists, and we had Jimmy Wales talk about Wikipedia before. You've said that that kind of index of good governance would do Europe good as well.
Yes.
Do you think it can be mobilized using distributed internet, something that's not so centralized as a foundation?
First of all, I think this work that Mo Ibrahim is doing in trying to encourage better government in Africa, I think is extremely important, and it looks at 52 different aspects of good governance in these countries. It lists all the countries in sub-Saharan Africa. It buys in the best newspaper in a country the full page ads which explains how that particular country is situated in the whole list of sub-Saharan countries. My first reaction when I have been in the prize committee which Kofi Annan chairs is that this should be done in Europe too somehow. Perhaps it could be done through, as you proposed to me at one stage, that why not in Wikipedia? As long as we have comparative studies, that would help tremendously, and I would like that to happen in every continent so that we have comparative studies and data available. I know that I think Club de Madrid in Madrid has been showing interest in perhaps doing something in Europe. That doesn't prevent a civic initiative in this form. So those who might be able to do something, please look at what Mo Ibrahim Foundation is doing and see whether that offers any possibilities.
Oftentimes, the situation in which you're brought is the conflict is a year, 10 years, or sometimes 400, 500 years old. But typically going forward, the root cause of insecurity has to do with lack of economic opportunities. And the ILO recently forecast that in the next 10 years, in the next decade, 1.2 billion people, young people, will enter the labor force. And with traditional means, there's jobs for 300 million. So what is your view on that and the root causes of insecurity and conflict?
Now, if we really want to fight terrorism and criminality in the world, we have to give hope for young people. There are excellent organizations. I have been associated with two in United States, International Youth Foundation in Baltimore and Imaginations in the same region. I'm on a board of an organization called Silatec in Doha, Qatar, where we are advancing employment and entrepreneurship in Middle East and North Africa. It started when the Emir of Qatar gave $100 million for this organization, and his wife is excellent chairman of the board. I would appeal to all of you, because this is a concrete thing. We have enough knowledge how to do this. I would like you to visit the website of those organizations I mentioned to you in US. They have done work all over the world and successfully. In Latin America, for instance, their track record is first class. And it can be. And the idea is to make entrepreneurs of as many of those youngsters who get a proper training, first of all on the basis how the markets in different countries, what sort of expertise they will require. This is of vital importance, and I think if we can improve the employment possibilities, I think the societies will look totally different and are not in a danger of becoming failed states.
I think this is a good opportunity. This is the first time we've done the Ahtisaari Tonight Show together, and whether it's the last time depends on the ratings, just like Conan. But we have about 10 minutes for questions, so I'd like to offer it up, perhaps starting with Mr. Hammersley there. Ben Hammersley at the microphone.
I don't really have a question, but I have a request from somebody else in the audience. Both of you are very good speakers and renowned around the world, but one of the things this audience might not know is that you both sing beautifully.
No way.
And I was just wondering if you would like to honor us with a song, perhaps something, a Finnish Christmas song, perhaps.
After party.
Oh. No,
promise.
There's a total misunderstanding that even I can sing, because I happen to be the chairman of the Board of Governors of Finnish Opera. So I was singing with my wife and listening to Faust on Friday evening, which was a delightful experience. But on the singing, I leave that to my son. So if you can talk him over in the evening, good luck.
Any further questions, please?
What a great panel. Very inspiring to see father and son like this. Some of the values that you're talking about related to transparency and sharing and participating probably requires education to practice this from a very young age. Maybe you can talk a little bit about your vision and how to install these values from a young age using technology.
Marko, do you want to?
You start. Or I go first?
Do you start?
I think actually President Obama, in his interview with Will and Jada Smith in the Nobel ceremonies, talked about expanding our moral imagination. And I think what he was speaking to is, on the one hand, internet it brings everything together, closer together in principle, but it's also disorienting. That's the other side of it, which means that people can also withdraw into their own particular identities. And I think I don't think there is an easy answer other than here. I think the online environment alone and having that interaction in online environments alone it doesn't give the learning experience well enough. So I think organizations that are putting more of the physical relationship and learning together have more of a chance of actually seeding that.
So the blended approach.
Yeah, but blended approach also in these kinds of events. But
I can't help telling you my own background because I was born in 1937, 2 years before the Soviets attacked my country, and that we lost that part of the country where I was born. So I had to move with 400,000 people to the rest of Finland, and I became eternally displaced person, and I mean eternally. So if one tries to explain why I got involved in this sort of work, that background has become more and more important. I have 12.5% of Norwegian and same amount of Swedish blood, so I'm a Scandinavian. I think this value base is of vital importance because I remember in Kosovo's case, I had to once in a private discussions with the Security Council members, I told them, perhaps foolishly, that for me, I have to be able to live with the proposal I'm going to make to you. And the secondary issue is that I hope that you can accept it as well. But that's the priority. If it's not that way, then I should not be in this business.
Thank you.
Hi, Isabel Maxwell from Blue World Alliance. Great conversation. I would like to ask in regard to the Middle East, which is a perennial, very, very thorny problem, where everyone many times will say, we know the solution in advance, but nobody ever seems to get there. And I have a question how perhaps we'd like to comment on the role of women, an increasing role of leadership for women all over the world, but in a problem like this that might be more helpful. Thank you.
I think one of the most annoying things that I have met, and in the Balkans particularly, that, and it wasn't any better in the Aceh negotiations in that there was not a single woman in the negotiation room. It was perfectly possible, for instance, in Kosovo, whenever I went to Pristina, I could see the Kosovo Albanian women's organizations and Serb women organizations in the same room. They may have disagreed on certain issues, but it was possible. But there's nothing that I could, as a mediator, do to force the delegations to bring the women in. I could always, and I had the responsibility and desire to see them. But may I say that it's not only these societies. I can't argue that we have a gender equality in my country. I speak very often on this issue. The CEO of my NGO is a lady, the program director is a lady, majority of the people who are there are ladies because they are simply competent. They are more competent than the men we have been able to recruit. But I think when I look around here, I mean, this audience is not, with all due respect, dominated by ladies, gentlemen. I think we men have to recognize that how much we lose if not everyone in a society gets an opportunity to do what they are capable of doing. But they should be allowed to do that. We have enormous amount of work to do in these countries, because let's not forget that when I get a peace agreement like in Aceh, it's like you would be firing a pistol shot and marathon starts. And it doesn't last only 2.5 hours in the best case, or 4 hours. Marko, what is your time?
That's more Hammersley territory.
Pardon? 4 hours, roughly, yeah, when you run. But it simply shows that then the real work starts. It's 5 years now when we got a deal in Aceh, Indonesia. I was there in December. I'm going in March again, later on this year again. Because you have to nurture that. It's like being a godparent to a child, that you have to live with that as long as it's needed. so that you get the change that is needed in the society. You can have a framework where women and men can have a decent life, but to have a well-functioning democratic society, it will take at least one generation, if not more.
Just quick follow-up. Do you have some advice for the peacemakers in the Middle East this year?
I have said that if we can't solve the Israel-Palestine crisis, we can't solve the rest of the crisis. I think there's a greater understanding now that you have to tackle all the problems in the region. When I attended before the change in the United States took place, I participated in a number of seminars in the US, and I think that recognition that you had to deal with all these issues, but the crux of the thing was that Israel and Palestine have to be able to solve their differences. As you said, we all know what needs to be done. The question is there political will and courage to do that? I said all the conflicts in the world, I said it in Oslo when I got the Nobel Peace Prize, every conflict can be solved. And we should not accept, I think we have to put pressure on the politicians that they also make difficult decisions, because difficult decisions have to be made, otherwise the solutions will not come.
Thank you.
We don't need to invent the wheel. It's simple matter whether there's political will or not.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.